So as you can see, I've created some falling rain using trapcode particular. We've got a little camera move in here. Now as the rain falls, the drops hit a floor, and when they hit the floor, we've got additional particles spattering upward. Also, as you can see, as that camera moves around, we have a little bit of a time freeze effect where the raindrops all freeze, the camera moves around, and then time resumes once more. So let's figure out how to get all this stuff set up. Let's create a new composition. Call this rain. And first I'm going to create that floor for my particles to collide with. I'll just make a new solid, and I'll make this 2000 by 2000 pixels, and I'll call this floor. I'm going to make this a dark gray, so it's a little bit easier to see on our black background. I need to make this a 3D layer, and I'll rotate this by clicking on the x-axis, and I'll hold down the shift key to rotate this in 45-degree increments. And I'll move this down so it's positioned lower like a floor should be. Next, we'll make a new solid. This will be for particular, and I'm going to make this the size of the composition, and we'll call this the rain. Let's apply trapcode particular. Now we need to set up the same rain settings that we've done before. So I'll do this quickly. I'll just set up a box emitter, move the position XY up, and turn up the emitter size so it's fairly large. So in X and in Z, we'll have a fairly large emitter. I'll also need to set this to emit in a direction, and I'll rotate that direction -90 degrees. So these particles are flowing downward. Now I need to turn the velocity way up so that this is moving as quick as rain should be. Also turn on motion blur for the comp and my layer here. And I'll turn the direction spread all the way down to 0 to eliminate any angles that we'll get with our raindrops. So as I mentioned, the aux system does one of two things. It emits particles from the main particles, like we did earlier, and it also will emit at what we call a collision event. Now, what a collision event is when the particles interact with another layer in After Effects. And this layer has to be 3D. You can see I've set the 3D switch to be on. So when these particles hit another layer, we can define a series of things to happen. We can have the aux system emit additional particles when this particle hits that other layer. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to set this to emit at a collision event. Now I need to define this layer to be a solid that can be interacted with particular. So if I go up into the physics section, I'm going to set my physics model. Instead of air, it is now going to be bounce. And we can only use one or the other. So I'm going to set this to bounce. Now air is grayed out, and I can go to bounce, control that open, and I can define a floor layer. I'll use the solid that I've called floor. Now what's happening is these particles fall and hit this floor layer. They emit additional particles. That's the aux system. So at this collision event, it is emitting 10 particles a second using all these settings here, using this color setting right here. That's where we get this little spectrum color from. I'm going to tell this to inherit the particle color. We'll turn the size way down. And I'm going to turn the velocity up. So as the particles are emitted from the aux system, they will actually move. So I've got some velocity set here. So as the particles hit the floor, we can see these small particles being emitted at that collision event. Now we can see our other particles are hitting and bouncing upward, and they're a little bit large right now. So we'll turn this down from the default setting of 5 to 2. And let's explore why they're bouncing. They're bouncing a little bit too much, actually. If we go into the physics section here, we have this bounce control. We've defined the floor to be the floor layer. And this floor is being treated at an infinite plane. So as this floor has a fixed size of 2000 by 2000, even beyond the edges of this floor, it will still be treated as a floor at its position. So we don't have to worry about sizing this up anymore if we make our emitter size much larger. But if we explore this a little bit more, we have this collision event that is bounce. So as these particles hit that layer, they are going to bounce upward. And as you can see, we've got a number of controls here that define how much bounce and how much randomness to that bounce we can add or subtract. We'll also have a little bit of a slide function here that as the particles hit, they will slide in either direction. I can also just tell it to kill the particles when they hit that layer. So as the particles fall down and hit the solid, those particles will disappear, and then the aux system particles will take over so that the rain comes down, hits, and then that particle disappears, and the aux system particles appear. Now we can see we've got a very thin layer of rain here, so I'm going to go back into my emitter and turn up the y-axis here and turn up the particles per second. Now it's feeling a little bit two-dimensional. I'm going to add a light to this scene. Just add a point light. And move this upward a little bit. And I think the velocity needs to be moving a little bit faster. So that's the basics on using collision events in Trapcode Particular. I think this is a very handy technique to have. Now, what I'm going to do is add a camera to this scene using a 35mm preset. And I'm going to look at position by hitting P and Shift A to show the point of interest. So I'm going to create 2 keyframes right here, and then over time I'll do a little bit of a camera move using the orbit camera tool here and rotate this around just a little bit. And we'll have it zoom in just a little. So from here to there, I'll have a camera move a little bit. I'll select both of these and go to Easy Ease so the camera smoothly moves from one set of keyframes to the other. Now in the middle here, what I'm going to do is create a time freeze. The main particles and aux system particles are all going to freeze. All their properties in time are going to freeze to a halt, and then I'll resume them. So if I go to the physics section here, I'll tap the tilde key so we can see this full screen. I've got the physics time factor here, which is defaults to 1. A value of 1 means that time is playing back in real time. So you can think of this sort of like a multiplier factor to our existing time. A time factor of 0 is going to freeze time, and a time factor of 2 is going to play back twice normal time. So if I keyframe this over time, by clicking the stopwatch there, I'll hit the U key to show my keyframes. Right now, physics time factor is set to 1. I'll have it animate from 1 down to 0. So as this camera is moving and the raindrops are falling, it's going to slow to a halt. Let's find a little more interesting than a frame here. There we go. So we can see them freezing in three-dimensional space. Everything comes to a complete halt. All the settings at that point in time completely stop. Now I can resume this just by animating this back from 0 up to 1. Now if you ever needed this, physics time factor can actually run backwards. If I set this to -1, time will begin to actually flow backwards, which becomes a little bit tricky to deal with because no matter what, your After Effects timeline is always going to flow forward, and your settings are now going to be running backward, and your settings will actually be based on your prior settings in the timeline in particular. So it becomes a little bit difficult to visualize when you're running time backwards, but it can be a pretty cool effect. Now time's running backward. Now in this example, I used one single floor as the collision layer. You'll notice in the bounce settings here, I have two layers that I can use, a floor and a wall. Essentially, these are two different layers I can use. It doesn't have to be a floor and a wall. This could be treated as two floors or two walls. So I'm going to show an example that uses both a floor and a wall. And this is going to be using a simple spark collision like this. So we can see that we've got particles falling and hitting the floor and doing a similar thing that we did in the rain, but they're also hitting the top of this text layer that I've created. And the only way we can do this is by using two separate collision layers. So let's get this set up. Create a new comp. We'll call this Sparks. Now in the original, I've got a text layer that I'm simply going to copy and paste. All this is some text that I created in After Effects. Pre-compose that, and I've got a number of duplicates here, and they're all offset by 1 pixel. And this creates sort of a fake 3D text in After Effects. So I've placed that in this composition, and I have the collapse transformation switch on. So now if I rotate this around, it looks like a 3D layer until we get to right on the side, and you can see that it's just a bunch of layers stacked on top of each other. But for what we're doing here, this is going to be a good enough example. So I need my floor layer. I'm just going to leave this 640 by 480. Put this below, make this 3D, and rotate this and move it down. That's just so that's touching the text. Next, let's make a solid for particular. Call this the Sparks, and apply trapcode particular. So it's going to be sort of a rain of sparks that come from above the type up here. I'll use a very small box emitter, and I'll put the emitter over here on the side of the text and animate it over time. This keyframe back. This will animate over 3 seconds. So what I'm going to do is go to the physics section and add some gravity to pull these particles downward. Next, I'll modify the particle so it's a little bit smaller and has a little bit more of a spark color. I'll just set this to one color at birth using kind of an orange. And I'll set the particle type to a glow sphere, so it has a little bit of a spark glow on it. And I'll increase the size random to about 40, just to randomize the size of these a bit. So as these sparks are falling, it would be great to have them sort of bounce off the top of this text. Now, I can't define this layer as a collision layer. That's not going to work for us. What I need to do is have sort of a separate floor layer and mask out the areas that I would like the particles to collide with. So I'm just going to duplicate this floor, and I'll rename this wall, and move this up above just so it's right at the top of the text here. And I'll look at this from Custom View 2. So I'll rotate this solid so that it's the same angle as the type. And temporarily, I'm just going to set the opacity to 50% so I can see the type below it. So what I need to do is mask this out so that the areas where the type are where the solid is left remaining. So I'll draw a solid here, solid here, very small one right here, one right here, here, and at the top of the S. So if I orbit around, we should see that this solid is kind of matched up with the top of this. So although we've drawn these masks here and we've done it in place so that we can see where the mask and the type are going to line up, unfortunately, the way After Effects works, a plugin cannot see this transparency when I use another layer as a transparency map, or what we're doing here, which is making a collision layer, and it should be looking for this transparency. It's not going to see this. So what we need to do is pre-compose this layer into a composition so that this masked solid is inside another comp. It's just kind of a shortcoming of After Effects and how plugins look at other layers. A plugin cannot see this masking, so we need to pre-compose this into another layer. Now, although I've set this up with the proper rotation and made it a 3D layer, we're going to kind of have to backtrack and remove all this stuff because we need this just to be a regular two-dimensional layer when we pre-compose it. I'm going to select this layer, go to pre-compose, and now this layer here has no masking on it. All the masking is done inside here, and now we can have particular look at this wall layer here. So now I just need to make this a 3D layer again and position this right on top of the text. And I'll just dial this in with some numbers here and rotate this so it lines right back up. Now I still have my opacity set to 50% back in this original layer, so I'll set that to 100. So now I have a pre-composed layer with no masks on it, and the transparency is matched right up with our 3D text. In fact, I might need to move this up just a little bit and back it up a little. So now, in particular, I can define that layer to be a wall. So we'll go into the physics section here, set our physics model to bounce. I'll set my floor to the floor layer, and I'll set my wall to the wall comp. And I'm going to tell it to use the wall's layer alpha. So all that transparency information that I've drawn with the mask is now going to work with the particle collision. So the areas where we have gaps, particles will actually fall through those gaps. I can turn this layer off here. I don't need it to be visible. I just need it to be in the composition. So fortunately, I can just turn that off. So now as the sparks fall across this type here, they should be colliding with the floor and colliding with the type. Now let's go into our aux system and have additional particles created when those particles collide. So I'll have the aux system emit particles at a collision event. So a collision event is going to be when a particle hits the floor or when it hits that wall layer above the type. So I'll set this to at collision event. Now we can see we've got our rainbow colored particles emitting when it hits the type and the floor. Let's set this to inherit the color from the main particle, setting this to 100%. Turn the size of the particle down, and jump back to our active camera view. And we can't see it right now, but as these particles are hitting these two layers, they are emitting additional particles. But right now the velocity is set to 0, so they don't actually do a whole lot of anything when they are emitted. They just kind of stay in place. So I need to turn up the velocity here so that when the particles hit this layer or this other layer, they'll actually move. And I'll turn up the particles per second here so that the aux system is emitting a lot of particles. And actually, I can make this emitter a little bit bigger so it's going to hit more of that top layer. So now as it sweeps across, we can see particles hitting the top layer there. And as they hit that layer, they also emit additional particles. So if I turn the velocity up even more, we'll see these dispersing even more as the particles hit. Now, as we can see out here, I've set this floor to be an infinite plane, so even as they fall off the floor, they'll still be acting as if there is a floor layer here. Now let's just create a simple light. And I'm going to size this floor up just a little bit so we're not seeing the edges of it. And we'll do a quick preview of this.